The Saga of the Greenlanders tells us that around the year 1000 AD, 500 years before Christopher Columbus set out on his epic journey, a small group of Norse Greenlanders, led by Leif Erikson, arrived in what is today the Canadian maritime province of Newfoundland Labrador. There, they built a settlement and remained for many years. The saga tells us that Erikson referred to this place as Vinland, or Wineland, because it offered an abundance of wild grapes, food, fresh water, and timber, a veritable paradise for these men. For centuries, however, historians, citing the absence of proof, dismissed the Saga of the Greenlanders as myth. That is, of course, right up until 1963, when archaeologists excavating at the site of L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland proved definitively that L'Anse aux Meadows was in fact a Norse site. By the end of the 1980s, archaeologists and historians had crafted a narrative detailing the history of the Norse presence at L'Anse aux Meadows. They concluded that Erikson and his men arrived around the year 1000 AD and remained, perhaps sporadically, for about 20 years before abandoning L'Anse aux Meadows for good. That became the standard narrative right up until the summer of 2018, when a chance new discovery smashed that narrative to pieces. I'm Dr. Rodney Stewart. Come with me on an exciting journey to L'Anse aux Meadows, where new, recent discoveries have changed everything we thought we knew about the Vikings of the New World. The Viking settlement at L'Anse aux Meadows is located in the Canadian province of Newfoundland Labrador. During the Viking era, AD 799 to 1066, Norsemen embarked on voyages of conquest and exploration on an unprecedented scale. In defiance of the tyranny of the unknown, Norsemen braved the wild North Atlantic in sleek, state-of-the-art longships like these. During the Viking era, seafaring adventurers from Norway settled the Orkney and Faroe Islands, and then later Iceland and Greenland before coming to the New World. Our knowledge of the exploits of the Norsemen who found their way to the western edge of the Atlantic comes from a body of literature called the Sagas, specifically the Saga of the Icelanders and the Saga of the Greenlanders. But there's a problem. Both of these sagas existed as oral traditions for hundreds of years before ever being written down, and therefore they were dismissed by historians as myth. The Saga of the Greenlanders tells us that in the year 982 AD, Eric the Red sailed from Iceland to the Brattahlid Fjord in Österrike in southern Greenland with his family and 40 or so companions. There he built a home and became the Jarl of Greenland. According to the saga, around the year 1000 AD, Leif Erikson, oldest son of Eric the Red, set out on a voyage in search of land rumored to be west of Greenland. With a small fleet of perhaps as many as 7 ships and 50 men, Erikson set out on his journey. Once the fleet had cleared the Brattahlid Fjord, strong wind and currents carried them northward for several days until they came to a long, rocky island strewn with boulders and useless for human habitation. Erikson referred to this place as Helleland, which literally means the land of rocks. Turning their ships southward, they made their way along a stretch of coastline where the sailing became quite pleasant. Going ashore at several locations, they noted the presence of an abundance of trees useful for making ships. Continuing their journey southward, they came to a quiet cove which appeared to be in a strait. Beaching their ships and exploring roundabouts, they decided that they would build a settlement and stay for some time. As I'm stood here on this quiet beach overlooking this placid cove where Leif Erikson and his men entered over 1,200 years ago, it's difficult to believe that they arrived here in small wooden boats crossing the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which can be very windy and the waves can be very, very ferocious. Erikson referred to his new home as Vinland, or Wineland, because of the abundance of wild grapes that grew roundabouts. The saga also offers a description of the settlement, which included a longhouse, several sheds, and a smithy. When Leif Erikson and his men landed here at L'Anse aux Meadows, they found in this whole surrounding area peat in abundance, which was ideal for them to build structures, sort of like the structures that they had built on their homeland in Greenland. The sagas tell us that Ericsson and his men remained in Vinland for many years before returning to Greenland for good. Over the following centuries, and right up into modern times, historians have dismissed the saga of the Greenlanders as a myth, owing to the fact that there is no proof that it ever existed. But in 1960, Norwegian archaeologists Anne Steen and Helga Ingstad, acting on a hunch, began excavations at a place called Lonso Meadows in Newfoundland. Their excavations would last for an entire decade, and when it was all said and done, they will have discovered what they came to believe was Vinland. For the Ingstads, big discoveries came in 1963. During that season, butternuts were found at the Norse level. Their presence was perplexing, as butternuts do not occur naturally in Newfoundland. Stores of bog iron and smelted iron were also found. There was no smelting of metals in the New World until the arrival of Europeans, so this was strong evidence. But it was the discovery of a small bronze cloak pin at the end of the season that would prove to be the greatest evidence. If there is no smelting of metals in the New World, there is certainly no mixing of alloys. Bronze is an alloy comprised of copper and tin. After 10 years of excavations, the Ingstads had uncovered a Norse settlement at Lonso Meadows much larger than that described by the sagas. From the 1970s to the 1980s, Parks Canada excavated the site at Lonso Meadows on the grand scale, collecting thousands of artifacts and hundreds of specimens and conducting thousands of carbon-14 datings. They also undertook reconstructing the longhouse that once stood at the far end of the encampment. Having come from Greenland, the Vikings would have been familiar with the use of peat as a strong building material. These peat bricks that you see here served them well in keeping the cold out and the dry in.
Yeah, dry, man. But
The official interpretation of the site at Lonso Meadows mirrored that of the saga of the Greenlanders. It concluded that the Vikings arrived around the year 1000 AD and remained there for approximately 20 years before abandoning the site altogether and returning to Greenland. That was the standard interpretation that lasted for many years. But in 2018, something new was discovered that would ultimately change that interpretation completely. In the summer of 2018, archaeologists Paul Ledger and Veronique Forbes discovered a new cultural horizon 30 meters to the east of the excavated site at Lonso Meadows. A cultural horizon is a layer or stratum that contains artifacts or ecofacts caused by humans. In the 2018 New Cultural Horizon, Ledger and Forbes found seeds, quite unique to Europe and very foreign to the New World, in abundance. They also found wood debitage, some of which still had the bark on it. They also found beetles, specifically Acidota quadrata and Simplicaria metallica, neither of which occur naturally in the New World. New dating techniques were used to analyze the ecofacts found in the 2018 New Cultural Horizon, including dendrochronological cosmic markers in a series of sophisticated Bayesian analyses. Use of these new dating techniques allowed Paul Ledger and Veronique Forbes and their team of scientists to draw new conclusions about Norse activity at Lonso Meadows. Specifically, that Norse activity began around the year 910 AD and came to a conclusion around the year 1145 AD, much longer than had previously been believed. Also, new ecofacts discovered in the New Cultural Horizon indicate that Norse and Native Americans occasionally cohabitated there at Lonso Meadows.